Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Outer Rim Cantina. My name's Alan and today I'm here to give you my full thoughts and opinions on Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. There will be spoilers throughout the video, so if you haven't seen the movie yet and are just looking for a general review, go watch my spoiler-free review that I uploaded on Saturday. As I said in the first video, there are some things that I really didn't like about the movie, and some things that I loved. Overall, I thought it was a good ending to the sequel trilogy, and a satisfying end to the saga as a whole. That being said, I think everyone can agree the biggest problems with Episode 9 were the pacing and time constraints. I already talked about both of these things in my spoiler-free review, so I'm not going to discuss them again here, but it is my strong belief that the film would have greatly benefited from being 3 hours long instead of just 2.5. Besides those two things, my other biggest problems center around Rey, and how JJ and Chris Terrio pretty much gutted her entire character that was built up over the first two sequel trilogy films. One of the things I absolutely did not want to happen was Rey to be related to someone famous and powerful that we've seen before, and that is exactly what they did. And it's not even like she's a Skywalker or a Kenobi or anything like that. They had to go and make her Palpatine's fucking granddaughter. Really? That whole concept is just ridiculous, and in my opinion goes against literally everything her character had been set up as in both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. The way it was revealed in the film was just as ridiculous, with Kylo just casually mentioning it when he meets her on his command ship after the crew goes to rescue Chewie. Although, considering the movie was co-written by the same guy who did Batman vs. Superman, I'm not that surprised. That whole interaction just seemed so forced, and was not a continuation of what had been built up throughout the previous two movies. It's almost like they had to write that in because they wanted to try and appease the angry fanboys online who constantly scream about Rey being a Mary Sue and how she must be related to someone famous and powerful because they don't understand the fundamentals of how the Force actually works. This also goes back to the press tour before the movie's release, where the cast and crew seemed to be unraveling everything they had said in 2017 about The Last Jedi, just to try and get on the good side of the clowns in the fandom menace. Guess what? It didn't work. The people who were 100% against Disney and the sequel trilogy aren't just going to suddenly change their minds because you decide to take back shit you had said in the past. Because that's what you tried to do, the movie suffered horribly for it. Not only did they fail to win over the fandom menace crowd, they alienated the fans who actually understood the message of The Last Jedi and everything it did and set up for to be continued in Episode 9. The film felt like one step forward and 2 steps back in that regard. They literally set up Rey's character to be the Force's response to Kylo Ren's darkness in The Last Jedi, not just out of the blue reveal that she's a Palpatine. Also, how the hell would both Luke and Leia know that? It wasn't hinted at or suggested in either of the previous two movies. The whole concept is just completely ridiculous, and in all honesty, almost ruined the whole movie for me. They managed to handle it well enough that in the end I thought it worked out for the film, but I still really do hate that they even made it a thing. My other biggest complaint that I talked about in my spoiler-free review was Rey's over-the-top Force powers. I was fine with her floating in the air with a bunch of rocks while she was meditating, but having her unleash Force lightning powerful enough to blow up a First Order transport out of the blue, and already mastering Force healing, was just a bit too much for me. I've never been one of those people to call Rey a Mary Sue character, but come on JJ, at least a little restraint would have been nice. My last big complaint about the movie would have to be that they left out way too many things that deserved at least a little on-screen explanation. I'm fine with not every little detail being explained on screen and just going with the flow with Star Wars. But you'd think since they gave Hux's treason a one-line explanation, they could have done that with a few other big things, but probably only if the film was 3 hours long. For instance, the Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary has honestly become a must-read for explaining a lot of what's happening in the movie. The opening scene with Kylo Ren battling in a snowy red forest, he was on a healing Mustafar fighting Vader cultists. A, that should have come later on in the film when Kylo begins his redemption to the light, and B, without reading the visual dictionary and playing the Vader Immortal VR game, you'd have absolutely no idea that they're fighting on Mustafar. Another big thing that deserved at least a little bit of on-screen love is the repaired Skywalker saber. How did Rey fix it? Why isn't the crystal cracked and the blade jagged like Kylo's? What is that brown band around the middle for? It's not that serious to the overall story, but considering they showed Palpatine, explained Snoke and Vader's helmet, and pretty much revealed Palpatine's entire plan in the first 10 minutes of the movie, you'd think they could have spared a minute to talk about the lightsaber. Also, Lando's role in Episode 9 was obviously trimmed down for the final cut, because in the visual dictionary it talks about how the First Order came for the leaders of the Old War and took their kids from them, and specifically had some things about Lando. I feel like Lando was supposed to have a bigger role with the Stormtrooper deserters from Kef Bir, and it was probably supposed to be heavily implied or hinted at that Jannah was Lando's long-lost daughter. But of course none of that actually happened, and we just got a few words between the two at the end of the movie. Again, a lot of what I don't like about Episode 9, aside from Rey's character, stem from simply not having enough time to include everything that needed to be included, while giving the audience enough time to breathe and process what's going on. The whole movie pretty much felt like sensory overload, and was difficult to keep up with at times. Better planning for the trilogy as a whole would have also alleviated some of that overwhelming feeling. Even including just a few hints or something to some major story points for 9 in the other two films would have made things a lot better. Despite all of the complaints I have about pacing, character choices, and story decisions, The Rise of Skywalker still managed to capture what makes Star Wars so entertaining to me. It might not be as ambitious as The Last Jedi or the prequels, but it's a far cry from being a Return of the Jedi remake like The Force Awakens was to A New Hope. Which is why I say that Episode 9 is good, just not great. What I love about the film just isn't enough to counteract all the things I hate about the film to make me rate it any higher than a 7.5 out of 10 or 3 out of 5 stars. I'm happy with how they handled Palpatine coming back. They actually did what I wanted them to do with that, which was have him discover the secret of saving himself from death and surpassing his own master Darth Plagueis. They also confirmed both of my theories that Snoke was pretty much irrelevant and only served the purposes of planting the seeds of Palpatine's new empire with the First Order and bringing Ben Solo over to the dark side and completing his training. My second theory was about Vader's helmet and how it wasn't actually the spirit of Vader speaking to Kylo, it was actually Palpatine manipulating Kylo into doing his bidding. Turns out I was right about both of those things. And that theory was actually one of the first videos I uploaded on the channel way back in March when I started this, so if you want to go check it out, I will have it up here in the corner. I also loved the expansion of ancient Sith lore and history throughout the film in the parts with Palpatine. We got to see a Sith temple like in Star Wars Rebels, and learn a bit about ancient Sith alchemy. The dagger is also an interesting part of Sith history, and the concept was first introduced in the Mortis arc of the Clone Wars. It's not the same dagger, of course, but the general idea and history is probably somewhat similar. The whole concept of Rey striking down Palpatine as part of some ancient Sith ritual to gain not only his power, but the power of 1,000 generations of Sith before him as well, is an interesting and, in my opinion, better take on the Rule of Two first introduced in Episode 1. When a Sith apprentice kills their master, do they also gain the power of all the generations of Sith that came before that master, thereby truly making that apprentice into a master and the Dark Lord of the Sith? If so, then the idea of Palpatine being the strongest Sith to ever live in 1,000 generations makes a lot more sense if he also has the power of all the Sith that came before him. I also really like the inclusion of Force healing in the movie. And I'm also glad they introduced it in The Mandalorian Chapter 7 before it showed up in the movie though, to explain that this is something that Force users can do, and it's not just special to Rey or something. I'm also glad they at least explained it a little bit when Rey used it on the snake thing inside the catacombs on Pasaana. What really made the movie for me though were the scenes between Rey and Ben Solo. Every interaction they had throughout the film was amazing, and everything I could have ever wanted between the two characters. Ben's turn back to the light was handled very well, and the further expansion of the Force bond was awesome to see on screen, with physical objects passing between locations, and the two even having a lightsaber fight from two different places. Despite the whole Rey being a Palpatine thing, it was interesting to see her struggle with who and what she is, and see her start down the same path as Anakin did when he saw the vision of Padme dying. Everything he did in Episode 3 was to prevent Padme from dying, but his efforts only ended up being the cause of her death. Rey tried to prevent the vision she saw of her and Kylo Ren ruling the Sith and galaxy together from coming true, which would have only ended up causing that vision to become reality if Ben Solo hadn't turned and intervened. Zori Bliss was an interesting character that served to give Poe's character the grounding that he needed and really centered him as a true general of the Resistance instead of just a cocky flyboy that Leia trusted. There were also lots of interesting concepts that were touched on and introduced in the film, like force healing and light speed jumping, that will hopefully be expanded upon in other forms of media down the line. Getting the reveal that Leia actually did receive formal Jedi training from Luke after Episode 6 and became a full Jedi Knight was really cool, and I feel like Rey burying the Skywalker saber along with Leia's in the moisture farm on Tatooine, where everything started, was a good way to close off the story of Skywalker, along with her adopting the name. The final scene of Rey activating her new lightsaber with the golden blade put a smile on my face because I'm also a huge sucker for different lightsaber colors and meanings. Maybe now we'll finally start getting more history around yellow, orange, and gold lightsabers, and what is significant about those crystal colors. I also like what they did with Finn's character by making him force sensitive. I love what they did with Jannah and the other people on Kefbir being ex-stormtroopers that had overcome their brainwashing and refused to serve the First Order. It finally makes the nameless, faceless soldiers we've been seeing on screen for 40 years not seem so much like nameless, faceless soldiers. I still would have preferred a Force Ghost party with Obi-Wan, Yoda, Anakin, and Luke showing up to talk with Rey, and maybe even Ben too, but sadly that didn't happen. What we did get was to hear the voices of all the Jedi that had come before Rey, with Obi-Wan, Yoda, Anakin, Qui-Gon, Luke, and even Mace Windu being the most notable voices, along with others that I didn't recognize right off the bat. That was cool to get to hear all of those Jedi once again, as they give their power to Rey to defeat Palpatine for good, but I think we should have at least gotten an Anakin Force Ghost along with Luke and Leia. There was a lot packed into this one movie, and I'm probably missing parts even now talking about it in this video, but I think I've covered all the major things that I wanted to talk about for now. As always, I'd love to know what you think of The Rise of Skywalker down in the comments. Feel free to post spoilers as well, because this is a spoiler video. I'd love to read different opinions and interpretations of the film. If you enjoyed this, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like on the video, as those really do help a small channel like this, and consider subscribing if you want to see more Outer Rim Cantina content in your subscription feeds every week. That's all the time I've got for today. I'll see you back here on Thursday for another Star Wars video. Until then, may the Force be with you.